Shall begin to call this meeting to order. And the first order of business is to review and adopt the budget. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns about the way the budget looks?
The agenda.
I do that all the time.
Oh my God.
And you know, it's not like I'm not aware of the faces I'm getting. I'm just saying, something's wrong here. Somebody's gonna have to act.
I think I need to make a motion to add an item to the agenda.
Well,
It's a well.
what is it?
Yeah, it's information.
Martha is planning to step down from her service on the VEHI board, so.
Oh, I thought she was gonna leave her job so that she could devote more attention.
Right.
Right, so
Oh,
we
let's add that to
probably
the
need to think
agenda.
about a secretary too.
That's the big idea.
Effective December 31st.
All right.
Besides my real job
Spend more time
and my
in February.
personal life.
I understand these things. I'm sorry. I'm pleased for you and sorry for
No,
us.
I just.
Yeah, I'm
Oh, no.
I'm disappointed myself, but
Well,
that is what I have to do what I
we've
have to
gotta
do.
do. Well, we'll see if we can't squeeze another meeting in between.
Do we need to move it, or are you adopting it with the addition of an item to discuss an upcoming vacancy? How do you want to do it?
Well, I don't wanna over formalize this. It's an announcement. Well, I don't care. Just add an
You
item.
want to just announce it, and it's announced and
Why don't we
it's
just
done?
announce it? Is that
Do
all
you
right?
need a secretary?
Well, it'll inform the secretary decision when that comes up.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
That'll complicate it.
oh, we do that today anyway.
Okay. Good. You've all had a chance to review the agenda. Okay, all right. Seeing no member of the public here other than our guest. And I guess I can ask you if you have any comments to make more generally before we get to.
Not at the present time.
All right, good. We'll move on to approval of the minutes of the last meeting. As Laura and I think Mark and Tracy are aware, I had a small change to make, to suggest.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Martha. And is there a second?
I'll second,
Thank you, Fran. Okay.
but I also have
An issue?
About the minutes?
yeah,
Okay, well, why don't you go first?
I'm sorry to do this, it's just I've been doing grammar with 10th graders for the past week. Board of Directors, it's S apostrophe.
Oh, you're so right. I've been meaning to point this out for a while.
At the top,
At the top.
you know what? I've never even looked at the top. Lisa creates a template
As I
for me,
said,
and I just go right down,
Been
thank you,
dealing
yes.
with grammar with
I don't know
10th
if we need to
graders.
put that in the minutes, but we'll change the template and we'll even look at past minutes. Mark,
That's okay.
I'm
I
shocked she got you to it. You
I
have
could crawl
disappointed
under the
me.
table right now.
You're sleeping, Mark.
Thanks, Fran.
Mark is our editor-in-chief.
You're right, never could.
That doesn't require a motion?
I don't think it, I
My eyes never go that high on the sheet.
But it is much appreciated to be found in correction.
Yeah. All right, so that's, having taken care of
Tell you it's the 10th
that.
graders we thank though.
If you look at the bottom of page 2, you'll see a reference to, I'll read the sentence that poses the problem for us, and you'll understand it implicitly in a minute. Rob Halpert indicated nonprofit law only requires the duties of the office, et cetera, to be specified.
Which page?
Very
I'm sorry.
bottom of page
Bottom
two.
of page 2 of the minutes, it's really at the
Very
top.
last.
Page 2, top page 3.
Last sentence.
Could you start again, Joe?
Actually, go straight to the top of page 3. The sentence that's troubling is, Rob Halpert has a conflict and is not able to represent VEHI further on this matter. And as it turned out, once we learned at the last meeting, after we had made this statement, that that Visbit's concern about conflict of interest is really more in the nature of a concern over potential liability if its employee, if VEHI is, basically if VEHI is sued, its employee is our president. That doesn't raise the same kinds of concerns that Rob as an attorney has about conflict of interest. So, and since he's obviously here, he's here in his capacity as legal counsel to advise us about this very matter that the draft minutes say he can't do. And so my suggested amendment is to change that entire paragraph, and I'll read it. If it causes any difficulties, we can make copies. Joel reported on the work he and Tracy were able to do since the last meeting. They spoke with our legal counsel, Rob Halpert. He concluded he should not work with us on this matter since he also serves in many other contexts as VISBIT's legal counsel. And VISBIT referred in its letter about this matter to a conflict of interest regarding its providing an employee to serve as VEHI's president, long sentence. He did say that Vermont law does not specify the duties of a nonprofit corporation president, only that there be one. So basically this retains the same substance, but for amending the notion that Rob had some unalterable conflict of interest. So I request that change be made.
So you're making the motion to amend
I'm
it,
making the motion to amend, to read as I said.
and you gave me a
have
copy
this
of it,
ready.
I had no problem, Rob had no problem.
I'll
You've seen
second
it.
it.
Tracy
As long as Rob
seconds.
is okay with it.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Amended, right?
Yes.
On the amendment.
Yep.
Thank you. So we now move on to, I believe there are no other proposed changes in the minutes. We can move on to acting on the minutes as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. Okay, and now that means we are free, in fact, to move into a discussion with our legal counsel. Tracy and I communicated with Rob over the last nearly 2 months, primarily the last month. And he's had an opportunity, if that's how he refers to it, to review all the multiple documents that we provided him, some of which I believe he probably had a hand in writing to provide us advice, sort of broad advice, not merely about the role of the president, but about how we might amend our organizational documents so that they read more, I guess the word is cohesively, although we haven't really resolved our discussion in that way just yet. And we thought it would be wise for us to have a discussion with Rob for a reasonably short period of time, 30 minutes today, with no expectation of actually reaching decisions, but in just sort of airing out the issues that Rob has flagged for us and seeing if there are questions, and then perhaps asking him to put together an actual proposal that we could act on either at the next meeting or the meeting thereafter, depending on how soon we meet. With that, may I yield the floor to you, sir?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I don't have a big presentation prepared today. I was asked, as Joel notes, Joel and Tracy asked me to look at, a slew of documents in light of recent developments that have affected VEHI, which pretty much I trace back to I think it was August 9th, a memo from VISBIT that came to us and indicated that after VISBIT had consulted with its own legal counsel, which wasn't me, a determination had been made that it would no longer be appropriate and would in fact, at least I think that memo indicated that it would be a conflict of interest for one of VISBIT's employees to continue to serve as an officer of VEHI, which pretty much, not to overstate it, but it kind of upset the apple cart a little bit in terms of how we've all been doing business for the last 17 years. At the time, I'm not sure any of us were aware of what would transpire after that. And what I've learned that's happened since then is that actually personally happy to see that it's happened this way, is that change through the execution of various resolutions and other documents, that change is one that, at least as of now, is really one that's on paper, not a change in practice. By virtue of a subsequent resolution of the board, and in light of the new situation in which Laura was compelled to resign as VEHI president, another resolution pretty much said, and again, it said a lot of things and did a lot of delegation, but it basically, from a practical standpoint, said we're going to keep going the same way we're going. But it does create some legal and practical issues as we move forward that I was asked to look into, and it creates for me, as just in my position as an attorney for the corporation, it gives me a little bit of pause that is tempered greatly, that any concern I have is tempered greatly by two factors. One factor is that both VEHI and VSBT have had a long history of working together, and I think in speaking with Tracy and Joel regarding this issue, and speaking with Laura in the past over various issues, we've all recognized that VEHI's not the usual corporate animal, so to speak, and VSBT's not the usual corporate animal. VEHI is even further afield, quite frankly, because the way in which most corporations are set up is that the only government involvement in the way corporations are set up is that the government, through the legislature, has created a series of laws that govern boilerplate operations for how a corporation should be organized, but pretty much leaves it up to the corporate organizers to run the organization how they deem fit and to set up their governance as they deem fit, as long as it's within those broad parameters. As we all know, VEHI, and especially recently after Act 11, is a very different corporate animal. We've had some rather direct involvement in our governance structure by the legislature. And that particular set of events did a lot of things, obviously, mostly in our governance structure, but it also, in my view, kind of forces, at least it forces a lawyer, and the weird and strange and quirky way that lawyers look at the world. We're pretty weird people. But we have to look at the world that way because it's important to follow all of these requirements. But in large fashion, it kind of forced us to do things, and it wasn't just Act 11. Long before that, we have done things that, as I've indicated before, many corporate counsel would look at and say, what are you folks doing? Why are you set up this way? This is crazy, okay? I think what I refer to is how unusual it was in the past to have one person serving as a very important officer in one corporation and simultaneously serving as a very important corporate officer of another corporation. And particularly when those two corporations had a very large contractual relationship, and yet it worked, and it worked well. So when I put the human part of my thinking cap on next to my legal cap, I said, okay, this is all right because it works. And it's pretty much all been blessed. And our regulators know about it. And if they're not gonna squawk, you know, who am I to squawk? And I'm not saying that we've done anything illegal, we haven't. I don't mean to convey that impression. I just think that the way in which we are set up and the way in which we operate mandates that we all must have some, we have to think creatively, and we have to recognize that we're a different kind of animal, and that some traditional notions of corporate governance need to, if not be jettisoned, take a back seat to the good work that we're all doing on both sides. So that's just sort of a long-winded preface to saying that, yeah, as an attorney looking through some of these documents and what we've had to do and what we are now doing, it can give an attorney pause, but it doesn't give this attorney pause. So I just want to make that clear. But I also want to say that, and we can get into the specifics of this, that one of the reasons that these recent changes brought about by our resolution and by Visbit's determinations and all the rest, which have led to a delegation of authority, and this is, this is the quirky part. VEHI has delegated various and important corporate functions and obligations it has to somebody who ostensibly has no relationship whatsoever with the organization. This person, I'm trying not to be personal here, so I won't even use genders. This person has no employee relationship anymore with VEHI, and yet this person has a tremendous amount of responsibility that we've delegated. So that's the part that gives me no concerns, and now I will get personal because I know the person, and you all know the person that this authority has been delegated to. And like I said before, it's really just a change on paper, and nothing has changed. And Laura continues to do the work that she has always done, regardless of her title, and as a result of this resolution, will continue to do that. So, and that's fine, and guess what? DFR knows this, and it's okay apparently with Visbit's attorney, and it's frankly okay with VEHI's attorney. I will say that I may have some concerns in the future, and that I haven't been asked this, but if I were asked this, I would advise the board to be extremely careful in the event at some future time when inevitably, things change. Membership on the board changes, and employees of Visbit will change. And so when I say that I'm not really concerned, and that a large portion of my non-concern is because Laura's still Laura, and Laura's position has changed on paper, but in terms of her relationship with VEHI and what she does for VEHI, it's really the same thing, and that's all well and good. Part of that is that, I know Laura, and I trust Laura, and I think all you do as well. But in terms of legal and corporate and structural governance things, which are not supposed to concern, when we're evaluating those kinds of things, we're not supposed to concern ourselves with who's occupying any office. Best example I can give you is, a small company that starts to grow and has always had just one person take in the checks, deposit the checks, report the income to the boss, and nobody's checking up on that person, and it's absolutely fine because they're a trustworthy person. Well, it's not absolutely fine.
No.
It's the worst possible structure you can have, right? And every now and then we read in the news that kind of a situation comes back to bite us, and the reaction is always, oh, well, we thought we could trust this person. Well, the point is you're supposed to put in controls and mechanisms so that regardless of who's occupying the position, that kind of thing is harder to occur. And I'm not suggesting that we have set things up here such that there's only one person minding the candy store. That was just an extreme example to indicate the dichotomy here between, am I saying that everything's fine with our structural and governance documents? Yeah, I am, because of the quirky nature of our organization. And it's going to have an inherently unique kind of governance structure, just, it has to, because of the way we're set up. But it's something I would caution the board about in the future, and I just wonder how much of the fact that our regulators apparently don't mind this interesting and unique setup is based on the individuals involved and the level of trust they hold in those individuals. So I just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, as far as specific documents, the biggest, I was asked to, think about what in our documents might need to be amended, what should we be looking at in terms of that stuff, legally stuff. And I see that we have a job description for our president, which is very much modeled on practice and what we've developed previous to the date of the resolution where we did the delegation. And I'm mindful of the fact that the current job of president of VEHI is vacant, right? And this job description, in my view, should either be significantly amended or just eliminated altogether, for a couple reasons. Number one, it reflects practice before the delegation and is no longer accurate in various respects. That's probably the main reason I would want to amend it, if not eliminate it. And secondly, based on the current practice, the post-resolution practice where we're delegating responsibilities of our former president to a VISBET officer and employee, it may no longer be necessary to have the position as it's described here. And we can return to a more boilerplate, for lack of a better term, designation and description of a president as being a generic corporate officer of the corporation. And interestingly, I actually took a look back at the bylaw. The bylaw description of the president is, it fits, actually, with what we're doing now. And when I first took a look at it, I said, well, this bylaw is kind of tailored to show that we're vesting in our president a lot of authority, but actually, I went back to other corporate documents that I've created, and I'm sure that I stole that language from other attorneys. It's kind of like the first rock and roll song. Who wrote that out? Nobody knows who wrote any of these songs because it's just all been stolen. But that's how you get legal boilerplate. It just becomes a matter of common usage, and frankly, the duties of president that are set forth in the bylaws, just about every corporate bylaw that I've looked at since this issue has come up and made me curious about it, states that the president is basically the executive officer or the CEO or whatever you want to call it of the corporation. And the difference in VEHI is not in the description. It's been in our practice to have a separate person who's not on the board be our president, and that is somewhat unusual. It's particularly unusual to have a separate person be designated as the CEO of a company when there's nobody for that CEO to supervise. There's no other employees of the corporation, and that's kind of strange. So with the change resulting from our resolution back in September, it seems to me that we can eliminate this job description, if not amend it. the reason I say we should eliminate it rather than amend it is that if we were to amend it, I would suggest we amend it to exactly the language of our current bylaw, which covers everything you need to have that bylaw do for the office of president. It talks about the president basically doing all of the job responsibilities and performing all of the necessary functions of VEHI, right? That's what the president does. And it then says, unless those duties and responsibilities have been delegated to another officer or agent of the corporation. And that's what you've done here. So it's what has happened with this resolution, as I've taken another look at all this, is thoroughly consistent with the description of the president under the bylaws. So if we were to amend the job description for the president to also be consistent with the resolution, it would say nothing more and nothing less than what your bylaws already say. So I would say, why do we have a job description for president when it's already described adequately and as completely as we need in the bylaws, and where this job description is inaccurate now in several respects? So that's one observation about that document.
Any thoughts about that? My only one is our
Mhm.
history.
Yeah.
And it was, we were born with Visbit and Vermonier in sort of tandem, and it has always been Visbit's essentially CEO who has acted as our president.
Right.
But until recently, that person was also on the board.
Right.
So my question, so I agree with personally I agree with everything you just said. My one question is, should, in light of our history or for any reason, should the bylaws specify that the president shall be a member of a director?
I think that you could do that, and what I was going to go on and recommend is that the most practical and expedient thing to do here is what most corporations do, is that the corporate officers are chosen from among the board members. So, and the other thing to remember here is that there are corporations that are employee-centric, for lack of a better term, and there are corporations that are board-centric. And you can't get a more board-centric corporation than VEHI. Why? Well, you don't need me to answer that question. You don't have employees, so everything is board. All of the guts of the work that VEHI does is done through contracts with outside entities, whether it's Vermont NEA or whether it's Visbit. So we don't rely on employees to do our stuff. We rely on contracts and other agents and all the rest. So we are board-centric. In light of the fact that we're board-centric, it makes all the more sense for our corporate officers to also be chosen from among the members of the board. It makes the most sense. And in fact, I'm not sure how else you'd want to do it unless you wanted to hire new employees and pay them salaries and all that. As to Joel's question as to whether or not we want to institutionalize that in the bylaws, I don't think it's necessary. And it would be unusual, but again, we're unusual. And that's not a reason not to do something. So that would certainly ensure that occurs, that we're following good practice and that our officers are chosen from among our directors. Having said that, in most corporations, that's the practice without a provision that institutionalizes it. So I think it wouldn't harm us to do that, and we could do it. But I don't know that it's necessary so long as the board is aware that that's the best practice. But we could do it, we could amend the bylaws. But I kind of joked with Tracy and Joel when we were first discussing whether an amendment to the bylaws is necessary. And I jokingly said, yeah, that's exactly what VEHI needs, is to amend the bylaws again, because we tend to do it rather routinely. And I'm thinking that if we don't need to amend the bylaw with respect to the description of the president's duties, and I haven't seen anything else in the bylaws that we need to amend as a result of this recent change, maybe we could take a break from amending the bylaws for a while. So anyway, that's the answer to that question. What else have I looked at? I guess I'm only gonna, rather than tell you everything I've looked at, I think that I should only, it would be a better use of your time for me to just highlight the only other concern I have that, and again, it's not a concern based on present practice and present personnel, but I've tried to really fine-tooth comb this thing and really look with kind of a focus on conflict of interest issues and where we might, as a corporation, be concerned about what is the potential here for future conflicts of interest and divided loyalties and all the rest. And I looked at the investment policy, okay? And VEHI, there's a lot of money that comes in and goes out of VEHI every year. It's not a trifling sum. The first part of the investment policy talks about the VISBIT president is in charge of managing the investments with respect to our cash equivalents, which is absolutely fine because under that part of the management, it looked to me, I'm no financial person and you're about to probably demonstrate that several times during what I say, but it looked to me like that was pretty much, there's no discretion in that part of the role. It's cash and it has to go in a certain place, and I didn't see much in the way of discretion. As I went through and looked at other grades and types of investments that we're allowed to invest in, the laundry list goes from non-discretionary to more discretionary decision-making. And I have to say, it gives me pause to see that somebody that has no affiliation with our organization, other than as an employee of somebody we contract with, and it's an important contract, to be in charge of making these types of investment decisions. Now that there are some built-in safeguards in that investment policy, and there's required reports to the board and all the rest, but that gave me pause, not because of what's going on currently, but the potential for what could go on in the future. That to me could lead to situations where a conflict of interest could come up. Okay. But again, that could also be that I'm a really bad investor and I'm a really bad money person, and I totally rely on others to take care of that kind of stuff for both my own work and my own personal life. So take what I just said with that particular grain of salt, because you didn't hire me as your financial expert, you really didn't. And if you did, you should all be, you should all resign.
Well, we blame our president.
But there. What else did I want to talk about?
Can I ask a clarifying question
Sure.
about that?
Just a-
I don't have the investment policy in front of me, and I'm sure it's somewhere in this inch and a half of paper,
Yeah.
but I'm not gonna find it quickly. So where the policy speaks to the role of the president, at a minimum, or the responsibilities of the president, does that need to change and be the
It says VEHI president right now.
president
Right.
or designee or board designee?
We have to figure that out.
Do we need some little word tweakings?
Probably.
Yes.
If
And,
we're
you
gonna,
know,
if we're
that's-
gonna stay in that way.
Tracy, that's a great point, because that's exactly what, I highlighted that, and that's what brought this up in my head. It was like, oh, well, this should be VISBIT president. And I'm like, VISBIT president?
You can't be doing.
I've got the VISBIT president looking after all of my corporation's investments?
Mhm.
So that's what gave me pause.
Well,
And that's what made me read further into this document, and I looked at the restrictions in our Class A operating funds, and I mean, you could have anybody do that because there is no, I don't think there is any discretion with that. It talks about 100% cash equivalents, and all the rest. But it talks, in each of these categories, it talks about VEHI's president being the person in charge. Now that's great, and maybe we leave that as it is, but I guess what I was looking at is a recommendation that we change that to vice president, and that's what gives me some concerns. And I'm wondering if we can keep that as VEHI president, and it would be up to the board to determine whether it's appropriate to delegate some or all of those management responsibilities to an agent of VEHI. In this case, it would be Visbeth. It might be Laura, it might be Laura and Chris, it might, whoever it is, but, and that's fine. And then the question becomes one of, as we get down the list to our Class B operating funds and our more discretionary funds, is that an appropriate agency? Is that an appropriate delegation? I'm not saying it is or it isn't, I'm saying, you know, it makes me just a little nervous to think about our discretionary investment money being watched over by somebody that we really don't have control over other than through contract.
Not
Laura,
every-
did you want to comment on
Well,
that?
just not everybody was on the board at this time, but Chris, was it 2017 that you and I recommended that VEHI engage an investment advisor? And, the board declined at that time to do so. Visbit board did engage an investment advisor, made changes to its policy, actually decided that it would have a consultant help determine not only specific funds and controls to implement their policy, and has been very satisfied with that approach. So there's ways that this board might want to reconsider, and Visbit can help guide options on how to think about that.
Well, to move our meeting along, and knowing that we're not going to finish our discussion about those issues this evening, I think it might make sense to have two motions and act on them. The first one would be not just jotting something down here, and as usual, it has more words than anybody wants to hear. But the motion would be essentially to request that Bob Halpert, regarding the role of VEHI's president, to develop specific recommended changes to VEHI documents consistent with his assessment of them.
Want to read that one more
I'm
time?
going to try.
Oh, I have it on tape, I can do
But it'll
that.
be close. The motion would be to request Rob Halpert, comma, regarding the role of VEHI's president, comma, to develop specific recommended changes to VEHI documents consistent with his assessment of them. I said, I'm not sure how artful that
I would second that motion.
is. Any discussion?
I just have a question.
Sure.
You referred to a second motion.
The second motion would be to revisit the board's apparent decision from 2 years ago regarding retaining an investment counselor.
Okay, so you're not asking for a motion, or we're not considering a motion now to simply
Not
rescind,
immediately.
to rescind the job description?
Oh, no, the motion is exclusively, without having changed it,
Investigate.
that's the second motion, which I haven't, that's not on the table, so I don't want to respond to it. The motion is what I read twice. It's about authorizing and requesting Rob Halpert to take us the next step down the road regarding the role of our president. It's been made by me, I guess, and seconded by Tracy. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Good, thank you very much. The second motion would be, just in light of the byplay between Rob and Laura just now, I didn't know anything about our history. It's merely at an upcoming meeting to, I don't know if we have to say reconsider, but to consider, I don't know if retain, to consider obtaining the service, engaging the services of an investment counselor. Period.
I think that's just because of discussion item by the next
Yeah,
meeting.
it's clear on the agenda. Why don't we just do that? All right, we don't need a motion. We'll do that. Thank you very
No
much.
problem.
I assume you are receptive to the request.
I'm happy to comply,
Good.
and I will make some recommendations for changes to the documents. I don't know that they'll be much more extensive than the one or two things I've pointed out here, so
The
hopefully
only,
there'll be no surprises.
the only thing in my mind is, having read all the documents, is there are multiple references to president. And
Yes.
we'll just need to make sure that remaining documents are somehow consistent with
Right,
whatever we
right, absolutely.
The other thing that has been practice of this bit, and probably VEHI in the past, is that sometimes you come up with some change to the bylaws that isn't essential, but you sort of add it to a list of the next time we amend the bylaws for a substantial reason, you reconsider all those things, so you might want to put what it might look like, even if they don't want to do it now, so that they have that for a reference in the
Sounds good. All right,
Thank you very much.
thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
Yes, thank you.
May I ask just a quick question or two?
Thanks again. Yes.
I went to the VEHI website, which I now lost somewhere in my, found it again.
It's got like 27.
I have to live with at least 2 dozen tabs open at any given time, but anyway. So I went to the page that is VEHI bylaws and policies. I didn't see the conflict of interest policy on that page. I found it in the Dropbox. But it looks like there's probably policies that are on this
He sees
page.
the conflict of interest, he doesn't see the investment.
Okay.
I see the code of ethics, conflict of
Okay,
interest.
we did not post every
All of them,
policy. We never posted policies. We did post those but we can post every one.
Well, I don't know whether there's a requirement. I mean, I only know as a
You
superintendent.
know where it's actually posted, to tell you the
Posted on
truth?
the-
It's under
the
the
VEHI.
membership section.
Yeah.
Under
It's
membership.
posted because you have to post it there, and we should link to it in
Okay.
that other
Okay.
place.
Can we move on?
Yeah.
Because we have a lot to
Yeah.
do. A fair point. Okay, the next item on our agenda, and I feel obligated, Chris, to make some stupid attempt at a joke and said, why don't we do this later in the meeting? But I'll refrain from doing that. The next is item 6, which is a review and acceptance of the quarterly financials as of the end of September.
Okay.
And I yield to Chris Roberts.
Alrighty, so you'll notice that the format of the financials has changed. Previously, in all the years that I've been here, I've been creating financials. I print out the trial balance and I key them into Excel. And I now have an accounting package that actually allows me to produce them directly out of the system. We started with that system a year ago, but it took a year's worth of data to be able to give you comparative statements. So basically it's the same information. It's the same information you've been looking at right along. It's just the formats have changed. So I'm going to skip, your packet actually has your budget to actual first, but I'd like to talk more about the income statement and the balance sheet first, and then we'll kind of swing back to the budget to actual. So if you come over to the income statement, which is the combining statement of revenue, expenses, and change in net position, you'll see that comparatively our operating revenues are up by 10%. So for our health program, we've taken in $65 million and 1.8 in dental premium. Like I said, compared to 60,000 last year. Our claims-related expenses, which obviously is our biggest expense, are our claims. Our claims are up about 15%. And most of that is health claims. Our assessments are up a bit. I mean, assessments are a mathematical function of claims. So you would always expect to see assessments go up at the same time claims are going up. Reinsurance expense is also, related to claims because the reinsurance market kicks in when claims reach a certain level. So as our claims go up, we have more exposure. So they're going to protect themselves by charging a little bit higher premium for that reinsurance. And then we have our contract with Remedy Analytics, which has not changed from the prior year. So like I said, overall, those expenses are up 15%. Our general operating expenses are the 2 service contracts, are the primary ones. And then we have some professional services, which are entities like Rob Halford and accountants to do your annual audit, things of those nature. Let's see, we haven't spent anything on travel yet, a little bit in health support, a little bit in some computer website expenses. We have our traditional insurance expense every year, that's your errors and admission insurance, your director's insurance. And then our wellness expenses. And so our wellness expenses, you'll see we've only spent a small portion of our wellness expenses to date. When you see that more when you come over to the budget, that's due to timing, and that's expected, that's normal this time of year, that they're just vamping up. The adventure is a big part of their, and then there's the June Institute. So you see some larger expenses later in the fiscal year. So overall, we've got before investment activity, we have a loss of just under 5.3 million for the health program, a loss of 205,000 for the dental program, as compared to an overall loss of 2.5 million a year ago. So we are experiencing, our loss is basically doubled compared to last year. The dental program, that's small numbers anyways, that's not really impacting us that much, but that was a planned decline. We know we have too much net position there. We set our rates to erode some net position, and that's on target. So that's an expected loss. Originally when the FY20 health rates were set, we were hoping for a break-even year. Now when we came back in and reset for FY21, we acknowledged that we do expect a loss of about $4 million. We're already there. Now, there is timing issues here that we're dealing with, because this is our higher claims period, the last 6 months of the year as compared to the first 6 months of the year, because that's when member deductibles reset. Calendar year, yes. So for a calendar year. However, it's difficult for me to sit here, before when we had our old health programs, I had trend data that I've been tracking for 10, 12, 15 years. So I could sit here and say to you, I can compare this to the last 10 years, and this is the cycle, and this is what I expect to see. I don't have that kind of history. So, that's what we expect. I know we expect higher claims in the last 6 months of the calendar year than the first 6 months of a calendar year. But, right now, we budgeted a loss of just over 4 million. We have a $5.3 million loss. So we'll see how that plays out as time develops here.
But this only reflects the first part of the second half, right?
Correct, this is 3 months, absolutely. So you might have the same sort of performance in the next 3 months. That's a challenging one to say. But then you may have people who do elective surgeries in July because it's the summer, and they're not having those elective surgeries when you go back to school. So that's all going to have to play out. I'm sure that that's a piece of it. How big a piece of it is that going to play? Like I said, until I have a little more trend data underneath a few more years, then I can speak to that a little more clearly.
In my former career with this organization, I always ask the question, what is 1%? How much in dollars is 1% of premium? It's
Right.
about $2.5 million. Is that roughly?
Yeah, on the health program, yeah.
So we're off by, theoretically, if this played out annually, this would be a 2% problem.
Yeah. And that
Or-
seems like
or
a
if it's-
fairly,
yeah.
and that seems like a fairly small number. I mean, when you think 2%, if you go over on your grocery shopping in a week and you go over by 2%, you're like, 2%, what's 2%? So realistically, it still means you've forecasted well when you're only 2% off.
Right.
But in our world, 2% is huge dollars. And so, and when you come over and you look at the balance sheet, just flipping over to that page for a minute here, you started as of June 30th with a net position of 33.8 million. With a $5 million loss, you're now at 28.8 million. So, I mean, that's a large percentage of your net position.
That's not good.
So, just something to continue to watch, and something I'm watching daily,
Okay.
really.
Chris,
yes.
excuse me, but for what it's worth, what do we do about it?
Well, I think we have to be prudent about future rate increases.
Right. Okay, this is all basically education, information to be used next
Right.
year.
Right,
Because we
I mean,
can't change what-
I mean, obviously, we do have that potential in our membership agreements to
Yeah.
assess, but personally
Yeah.
speaking,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
road as your finance person, I'm gonna recommend you never go down that
That
road.
doesn't feel like a good move.
Let's plan well in
Right.
those future rate increases to make sure that we keep ourselves sound.
Good.
On the, and then you have some interest income of about 201,000 and some positive market change of 99,000 this year. That's all helpful. Like I said, I kind of talked a little bit about the bottom line on the balance sheet. You have your assets, most of that is cash and cash equivalents. We have some contribution receivable, that's about 1 month's worth of premium. A little bit of other assets and other receivables. Your liabilities are your claims-related liabilities of 16.5 million. And then prepaid contributions, again, that kind of offsets with contribution receivable. It's all timing of when members get billed and when they pay. And but we don't have anything, even though those are large numbers, there's nothing concerning there about members not paying us or anything like that. You know, that's all on track for the most part. Have my issues once in a while, but for the most part, most of our payers are good. So any questions on the income statement or balance sheet? Okay. So on the budget to actual, this is where you get your full detail because these are summarized statements. So, you know, if you really want to delve down into the detail, your budget to actual gives you every line item that I track. And the difference here is it's comparative again. Well, it's not comparative to last year, it's comparative to your budget. So if you look up top member contributions, we've taken in 66.8 million. Our overall annual budget was 273. And the variance, previously the variance was how much you had spent or how much you had collected. This computer system flips that. So it means you have 76% left to go. Okay, and 24% is what you've collected. So it's a little bit thinking about looking at that number a little differently. There was nothing on here when I went down through that I was concerned about. You know, we have a few line items where we have spent the majority of our budget, but it makes sense. It's all about timing, like accounting fees. You have your annual audit. The audit has happened. So of course you've spent all your accounting fees, so on and so forth. So there wasn't anything in particular that jumped out at me as significantly concerning here. I don't know if anybody had any specific questions on that. So if not, but I will always tell all of you, you know, I'm here. So if you have a question later, if something comes up as you're looking at these, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. More than happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any, the budget, there I go again. The agenda calls for us to act on accepting the quarterly financials. Is there a motion of that? Second.
I think Martha, I did.
Oh, and Martha
I
did.
seconded. Yep.
Martha, a finance person, jumps at the opportunity. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good, we have accepted the quarterly financial report. Chris, thank you very much, as usual. All right, I think we should move ahead as quickly as we can.
Yeah, there'll be a brief update on the race if you want me to
Let's
take that.
go right ahead.
I stand
Update
because
on
of-
dental and health rate
I
plans.
stand because of stiffness, not because I'm anxious to leave the room. So we filed both our health and dental rates. The health rates are under review. DFR usually asks 2 rounds of questions. That's pretty typical. They've asked their first round of questions. Most of them are directed at Blue Cross. Their details, why does this factor look like this on this page but that on that page or something, and nothing was concerning. They asked one question of Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I to explain a little bit more about our administrative fee, so we did that. So we seem to be on track. Nothing unusual at this point. Dental, we filed, and as I told you by email, but I think that the minutes should reflect, the dental rate was approved as filed. You did give us some options on filing, and we did hold the rates level, but we did not enhance the benefit to remove preventive and diagnostic care from counting towards the maximum. We did not have the funds within budget to do that, but Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I have had several meetings. Chris is in with this conversation as well, and we're working with the actuary to try to come up with sort of a 5-year vision for the dental program that might look at some changes to plans. So we expect to bring you something probably in the spring on that.
Okay. Thank you. Really, any questions? We move right along. The next item is one of the more interesting ones, and probably one of the more interesting ones that shouldn't take a whole lot of time for us to reach a decision about. We are being asked to authorize the filing of what's called an amicus brief in a state Supreme Court case stemming from an action of the Green Mountain Care Board regarding an outfit that we have provided support to over the last couple of years. Who do I yield to?
That would be me.
Mark.
There's a few documents on this topic in your materials. Perhaps the easiest one to follow, for the purposes of my comments, is the summary of the recommendation that Laura and I are making to endorse sending an amicus brief that came to you on November 14th. Actually, it was in the Dropbox. It stated November 14th. You will recall, this document states that Laura and I, and actually Joe Zimmerman, I think, was still aboard at that time, endorsed the creation of the Green Mountain Surgical Center in 2014. Laura and I were a little embarrassed to see we forgot to date our initial letter to that
Twice
effect.
in one day now.
I know. That's not a good sign. But we actually did send a letter on behalf of VEHI, and we stood by that letter then. And we still stand by the letter. Briefly, when the Green Mountain Care Board issued its certificate of need for the Green Mountain Surgical Center, and it generated an enormous amount of controversy, public testimony, and of course our letter in support. It granted a license that was for a multi-specialty center. And David Mickenberg, who's the attorney who contacted us on behalf of the Green Mountain Surgical Center, was quite clear in his written statements to us and also in his conversation with us that there was no ambiguity with the original CON, Certificate of Need, that it was clear it was a multi-surgical center that was being licensed. In July, the Green Mountain Care Board, for reasons I can't really speak to, clarified that original Certificate of Need to say that the center was restricted to just 5 specialties. And that is what has triggered the challenge to the Supreme Court. And because of how the Green Mountain Care Board is set up, its regulatory scope, when a decision is challenged that the Green Mountain Care Board has issued, it goes to the Supreme Court. And David and company have asked that we file a friend of the court brief, saying that we stand by, if you will, our original letter, and we believe that it's important that the original CON be honored as we believed it should have been back in 2014. The process, if you approve of this brief being filed under our name, it will be written. It is in fact underway right now, being composed by our attorney, Wanda Podoro-Weaver, Ron E. and David Mickenberg. They're working on it. They're going to get a draft to me. I'm going to work on it over the weekend pretty extensively. I'm going to share it with Bobby, Joe, and Laura to make sure it meets their approval. And then, once we're on the same page with it, assuming again you approve this, we're going to send it to Joel and Tracy for their review. And it needs to be at the Supreme Court no later than Friday, November 29th.
All before Thanksgiving.
Perfect timing. So it'll be an expedited process.
Day after Thanksgiving.
No, but nobody's open.
Right.
So again, this is going to have a pretty quick turnaround, but I'm confident because of the legwork we've already done and the preparation work already behind us, that we're going to be able to meet that deadline, assuming again it meets with your approval.
I'm obligated to ask if there are questions.
I have one.
Okay.
Mark, will the brief say essentially what your original letter said?
Yes, it'll be more
2014
expansive than the original letter, but essentially,
essentially the
we
same.
think this center helps to give members, our members, if you will, more choice at a lower cost for a variety of services that we think they need. It's beneficial to them, it's beneficial to us, and we believe that the original CON should be honored.
And if you look at the materials in the packet where Mark and I got a letter on November 4th, where they suggested things we might consider putting in the amicus brief. Mark and I concurred that conceptually, those were the right kinds of things. So we may tweak it a little bit,
Yeah.
but it would generally be the language similar to what you've already read.
Tracy.
Thank you.
Is there a legal question about the scope of the original certificate of need, or is that pretty much agreed on by the parties that it was?
That's the nub of the
That's a
issue.
good question.
Okay.
That's what the Supreme Court will have to decide.
So really, we're taking the position that our support and our belief that the certificate is that the certificate of need was a multi-use.
Actually, no, we're not actually,
I don't
because
want
that
to- I don't-
hesitated me to take a side. We are continuing to express our support of the value of the Green Mountain Surgical Center and it having a broad scope
As a
to
multi-specialty
operate.
center.
We're
Yeah.
not the lead on this. We are a
Right.
friend of the court. The parties
Yeah,
are going to make those arguments.
I agree with that. I
Yes.
just didn't want to get
That's right.
into a legal argument.
No, we won't be
that was-
diving into the
We're not,
legalities
we're
of
not.
this.
We won't be saying the Green Mountain Care Board was not appropriate to make their decision. We're saying we still value the Green Mountain Surgical Center as a multidisciplinary center.
Consistent
We might
with the
need a
original
Green
CR.
Mountain Care Board someday.
Are there, you're not supposed to take things personally. Are there questions further?
So do you need a motion?
We need a motion
Yes,
to
please.
authorize management to file an amicus brief on behalf of Green Mountain Surgery Center.
Subject to final approval of the chair and vice chair.
Right.
Is that all right?
Yes. Yes.
So moved.
That's Fran and Martha second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you. Joel and Tracy, we'll try to have something in your mailbox by Tuesday. At the latest.
Just before the kids.
We'll do that.
I'm flying out Tuesday morning.
I'll try to have it Monday evening.
So just know, I can do it Tuesday afternoon.
All right.
So I'm-
And just know when it's in your
It's not
box,
100%
it means that
available.
Mark and I have concurred that
Okay.
it should be there.
The next item on the agenda may conflict with dinner, or may overlap with dinner. I'm not quite sure, there's nobody there, but there's stuff in there.
She's
She
been
was
walking back.
just setting up.
It's not quite
I saw
done.
her
It's
All right.
setting
out
up.
and she's
All right,
done.
well, let's get into this discussion. Let me say that I do not anticipate that we're gonna be in a frame of mind after this discussion to make any decisions immediately, other than to authorize further discussion. This is an interesting issue about which I've learned everything I know in the last week, and that means not much. But I do know this, when we were talking about finalizing the agenda, the question was how much time to allocate to this. And, you know, there were several schools of thought among the four people on the phone, on the line, but they ranged from not a lot of time to more time than we have. And so I said, what about 45 minutes? It was easy for me to say, because that's what I did. Anyhow, the upshot is that during our discussion about how much time to allocate this, it actually lasted 45 minutes. And so I think that made the point that there is some real hefty issues underlying what appears to be, at least from the Blue Cross Blue Shield standpoint, and so a sort of automatic decision on its part regarding us. And I think I'll let it go there. I have sort of an outline of how I think this discussion ought to go, but I'm not gonna hold to it. I just wanna make sure we cover certain things. I feel as though I ought to yield the floor to somebody to spend, how crazy is this? No more than 3 minutes describing the history of one care, just to start us off, because that's the context within which this fits. Is that a legitimate request, or?
It's actually an interesting challenge. I'm happy to jump in.
You go ahead.
3 minutes, about a good time.
Wait a minute, Laura, what's wrong? You look like that's
No,
not a
I'm like,
good
that's
idea.
fine with me.
Oh, okay, good, all right.
So, the history of One Care begins really in 2014. One Care and the state and the feds begin a project known as the Shared Savings Program, where the parties agree that they're going to attempt to institute new care coordination programs for Medicare and Medicaid only in the first 3 years of the project's life. And then in 2017, something called the all-payer model comes into existence. This is a contract between the state, between the federal government, that allows the state greater latitude in how it manages and cares for people in its Medicaid and Medicare populations. CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is what grants this additional latitude. In exchange, the state is obligated to try to align the different payers for healthcare, and that would be state payers, federal payers, and commercial payers, to commit to a system of payment and a system of care transformation that is designed both to improve care and to help to mitigate the rising cost of healthcare and to try to keep the medical spend, at least, within the state of Vermont at a rate of 3.5% annually. So think of all the payers in Vermont coordinating their efforts to provide better care, higher quality care at a more affordable rate over time. And to do this requires, this will be the one care argument, and in fact, it's not just an argument, it's actually an obligation under the all-payer contract that the state of Vermont be able to demonstrate to the federal government for it allowing the state of Vermont to exercise greater latitude in its Medicaid and Medicare populations. One Care is obligated to grow the population of Vermonters who are subject to this care transformation and payment reform process over the course of a 5-year period from 2017, or that's 6 years, 17, 18, 19, 20, 6 years basically, 2017 to 2022. The federal government and the state agree that the state of Vermont is going to try to hit these scale targets. A certain number of Vermonters every year, up to, I want to say, 250,000, something in that neighborhood?
It's 300.
Maybe 300,000. And over the course of that time, the state of Vermont would also be, through the commercial payers as well as through Medicaid and Medicare populations, instituting these risk-based reimbursement systems. In the first 4 years of One Care's existence, 14, 15, 16, and 17, there was no risk sharing by the medical community. There was what's called shared savings. So if One Care was successful in lowering the cost of care, then Medicare and Medicaid populations initially would share in those savings. There was no downside risk to the medical community. Beginning with the all-payer model in 2017, there are now risk-based reimbursement models in place where the medical community says, we are willing to accept a certain degree of risk here in exchange for the commitment to try to lower healthcare costs and provide higher quality care. If we deliver care at a lower rate than what was projected, we will share in those savings based on whatever that shared model of risk is. If we don't deliver, if the cost of care rises above what we contracted for, then we have to pay back a certain amount of money to the state or to the commercial payers, depending on how that risk is structured. And the risk is,
Who's we?
Yeah.
we would be One Care. And the risk is structured differently for Medicare, Medicaid, and the commercial populations. And that's where, frankly, it gets really muddy and complicated. So I don't know, that's
Yeah.
roughly
That's
4
great.
minutes.
It's more like 5.5. That's all right.
It just felt like an hour and a half,
It's
right?
really, we just gotta get some real, we have to get grounded in the basics here before we get to Andrew Garland's.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry.
Sure.
One Care is an accountable care organization, ACO. The ACO comes into existence because of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act gave birth to the ACO movement. We have one ACO, we're the only state with just one ACO, and that's One Care.
What is One Care? I mean, did you describe what it's supposed to do? Who, what? Is it, it's an entity consisting of what?
So UVM and Dartmouth basically came together to start One Care.
So the two teaching
The
hospitals.
two
of
big
this-
hospitals. You might remember there were 3 entities vying to be
Right.
ACOs at one point, and the other 2 were quite small and sort of got folded in. OneCare is set up as a nonprofit, but only because Dartmouth and UVM both put in millions of dollars of seed money. And if OneCare is successful enough that they can repay that, they want that ability to repay. And if OneCare were to fold its doors at some point and there was money left, Dartmouth and UVM want to make sure they get
their investment back.
investment back. So that's the profit nature of OneCare. I will just add that Blue Cross started talking to us about OneCare at least in 2017 as it moved into the broader picture. And the initial conversations were very much watch, sit on the sidelines, let them set up their organization, let them demonstrate some savings or some
Forgive me,
success.
this is the pronouns are racist. So we and Blue Cross, basically, we were advised to watch that both of us would watch OneCare and see how it develops.
So Blue Cross kept us apprised of the changes that were going on and the development of OneCare and it getting engaged with its exchange population.
In 2018, that's when that's.
And Blue Cross said that we should not be surprised if at some point we got a call from OneCare who was interested in talking to us as a fairly big player in the state of public employees. We never got the call, by the way. But their caution to us was it was early and we should be hesitant to engage without a lot of information. That started to shift, I think, this, probably not before June, but maybe earlier in the spring.
Well, 2018 is when they first floated the $21 per member per month offer by us.
Right.
Which we rejected.
OneCare's model at that time was we could pay them $21 per member per month in order for them to try to improve care for our patients, and if they were successful, they would keep the money. It wasn't a model that was attractive.
Stunning.
What shifted in early 19 was the leadership of OneCare. Changed its CEO, changed some members of the board, so leadership changes, and a turning point, I think, in their evolution from trying to build a system and spending a lot of time, trying to build their house, so to speak, to focusing on changing medical care as opposed to creating a system that would potentially change medical care. So the leadership changed, and I think the goals changed, and that's what sort of brought us to this point. Blue Cross seeing an opportunity where OneCare's not asking us to pay to join and willing to take up and down risk, and if there's positive savings, they only get part of it, we keep part of it. That philosophical change in OneCare that Blue Cross saw, again, we're getting this through Blue Cross, we have had no direct conversations with OneCare until 10 days ago. That led Blue Cross to reach a point where they felt that they could bring into their entire network, including their self-funded clients, of which we are one, OneCare in a way that they thought was reasonable. So things happened rather rapidly in spring of 19 to present that led Andrew to this decision, Blue Cross to this decision represented in this letter.
Well, I realize how limited we've all can take that much information in a short period of time, and I'm sure there's a lot more. I know there's this fundamental emphasis, rhetorical emphasis on improving access to primary care within OneCare. We ought to probably get into that at some point and see how that relates to what we're about. There are other entities besides Dartmouth and UVM that have some sort of ownership in OneCare or are formal members of OneCare. A whole lot of provider agencies that we'd be familiar with, visiting nurses, area agencies on aging, and a number of others, as well as, I guess, all of the hospitals in the state either bought in or joined in, whatever that means. So this is a really large, I won't call it a monster, but it's really, really large. And the intention is to bring in, I guess the obligation they have to meet their federal requirements is to bring in just about half the population of the state under its umbrella within a reasonably short period of time, I think. Anyhow, I mean, that seems to me that what generates Blue Cross Blue Shield's, I'll say decision, but I think it's less than a decision, at the end of September in its memo to us that it's folding 19,000 of our 35,000 active employees into OneCare so that they can be counted, as I understand it, so they can be counted towards the annualized membership goal. Those 19,000 people are people who are currently being served by, if I understand this right, by primary care docs who are themselves part of the OneCare network.
So can I just add,
I think that's it, I think that's the background, and I'm liking.
the OneCare network is voluntary, it's actually required by this rule to be voluntary. So doctors and hospitals get to decide whether they are in OneCare, and they can annually change that decision. I don't think they can change it in the middle of a year, I think it's an annual commitment. Hospitals have moved in and out, and some of the smaller ones, and you can be in OneCare for your Medicare population.
Oh, I see.
You can be in OneCare for Medicaid population, you can be in OneCare for commercial population.
We are
So the
commercial,
vast,
I
yes,
take it.
we're part of the commercial umbrella. The vast majority of hospitals and providers are involved in at least one of those three, not necessarily all three. And as a individual, you are participating in OneCare on one level if your primary care doctor, either through themselves or through their employer, right? Because if Gifford Hospital goes in, their primary care doctors they employ are going in, are part of the OneCare model. So in our case, our retirees who are in Medicare are in the model because Medicare's in the model. Our Medicare primary retirees are in it for the last 2 years because Medicare's in it. Our active employees who choose a PCP who's a part of OneCare has been sort of, what's the way that they count them?
So you can be attributed to OneCare and not be attributed to the all-care
That's
model.
okay.
Right? So Bobby Jo's my primary care physician. I'm attributed to OneCare because she's my primary care physician.
And
But-
she's in OneCare.
Right, she's in part of the OneCare network. Let's say she works at Central Vermont Hospital right down the street. So I'm attributed to OneCare solely because she's my primary care physician.
And that's
However-
true right now.
That's correct.
What does
However-
attributed mean in that case?
Does
Sorry.
they count me as part of the
count.
OneCare community? However, if my care does not include a risk-sharing
Oh,
methodology,
God.
I'm attributable to her for purposes of OneCare's purposes, but I'm not attributable to the federal scale targets. And the all-payer targets are really important to OneCare, to Blue Cross, to the state generally.
So, moving, does the number 19,000 of our members apply to?
19,000, as it's been proposed, would be attributable both to OneCare and to the all-payer model. It's really more relevant to the all-payer model, because the 19,000 people are
Because it's a-
already
it's a
seeing
federal-
doctors in the
federal
OneCare network.
They're
They're just not attributable to the all-payer model.
All right.
Yes.
And the 19,000 is an estimate in January of how
Right.
many people will
Right.
have
I get
PCPs
that.
as part of the program.
That makes sense. Fran, you look confused.
Fran, what's
So
wrong?
I can't believe it. It's easier to work by 10th graders.
Yes, it's one of those times when grammar's easier than anything else.
You talk about the risk, something,
Well, there's a
risk
risk
corridor.
sharing model,
what,
right?
what does that mean?
Profit loss, right?
So what it means is for the first time,
Money.
risk sharing means you're not just guaranteed a set fee-for-service payment as a doctor. So right now, if you go to the doctor and you get an MRI, let's say, I'm just making up numbers, let's say it's $150 for the MRI. The doctor does the MRI, they get $150. And that's the end of the story. In a risk-sharing model, the provider is not guaranteed necessarily a certain amount of money. The way that Blue Cross has set up this risk-sharing model, particular to this at this time, and they have some other risk-sharing models going on now, very minor, some pilots that we are a part of, but modestly, this is a different scale, is that if Bob, if you go to OneCare and you need an MRI and it's $150, the doctor still gets $150 for that MRI. That doesn't change at this point. What's changed is that Blue Cross has estimated what they think the 19,000 people attributed to OneCare will cost from a claims medical perspective in the next year. It's pretty much the work they do to help us set our rates. They have to figure that out
They
anyway.
set a trend based on what they
Right.
think of.
But they're gonna just take, instead of our whole 35,000 actives, they're gonna look at just those 19,000 people, and they're gonna think, they're gonna need X amount of care. I don't know, $150 million of care. They've already done that work. What they basically said to OneCare is, if you can spend less than the $150 million and meet some clinical targets, right? Because we don't want you to save money at the cost of care.
Right, make sure that they
Right.
still are,
So if you can spend less than $150 million over the whole year, but they're gonna look at it quarterly, we will give you some more money, like a bonus. Okay, you still get your $150 for every MRI you do, and you still get $35 if you give them a flu shot, whatever all those things are. But if you can take care of them for less than what we think you're going to anyway, we'll give you some extra money. Meanwhile, if you spend more on them than we anticipated, we're gonna give you less money. And that's the risk. They can go up or down. Now, you gotta start from somewhere. So where do you start from? So in addition to the fee-for-service, which isn't changing in this year, you still get for every service you do, if you're a OneCare provider, Blue Cross every year develops a budget that they increase those fee-for-service payments across the state. It's not just a 2% for across the state. They do it in a variety of ways. One of the things they look at, sometimes there's new codes and new procedures that they have to put money towards that never got charged before. Sometimes they look at the fact that, gee, we're paying $150 for an MRI, but the national in the region is $160. We're underpaying, we should maybe bump it up a little bit. They do a lot of different things and they give some increases. So they took their budget on how much they allocate to increase. And some of it they did spend actually correcting some things and adding some things. And the rest of it, instead of giving everybody a cost of living increase, they took that money and they backed into $3.25 per member per month for these 19,000 people that they're giving OneCare only. So if you're not in OneCare as a doctor, you basically didn't get an increase on those fees. And that's the starting point.
And that's if we.
No, that's going on actually
now,
today. They get the $3.25. It's neutral to us, because we would have spent that anyway, but instead of spending it on just, here you go, here's more money to everybody in the system, you're trying to target it to the group of people that are trying to change clinical care. So that's a starting point. Right now, it's been going on for most of this year. It's cost neutral to VEHI. What Blue Cross is proposing for 2020 is that $3.25 can go up or down every quarter depending on whether OneCare is beating the targets or losing on the targets.
It doesn't float right now, it's just a solid $3.25.
Which way does it go?
So if next year in 2020,
Yep.
Blue Cross is gonna pay $3.25 a month to, it's an incentive
Mhm.
to these, to do something different. If OneCare can beat that target of how much they thought they should have spent, half of that savings
Mhm.
stays with us.
Mhm.
And half of that savings can go to make that $3.25 go up as high as $5.75. That's the maximum it could go.
So if they beat the targets, they get more money, which is, that's what I thought I was thinking.
Right.
Like,
Yes,
It's
that's
hard to
And then
follow
let's
this
say
one.
the next quarter,
Yep.
they lose ground and they're under the target.
Mhm. Comes back
Now,
down.
that means that it comes back down.
It cannot go below 75 cents though.
And it
That's
can't
why
go
they
above
It can't go above
5.70.
5 cents.
That's the
Correct.
word corridor.
Right.
That is correct.
So if I'm right, and that one knows, this first time for everything in this one, what Mr. Garland has informed us about, but which has changed since is a decision by Blue Cross Blue Shield to move those 19,000 roughly people as of January into the realm of the corridor, so that they qualify towards, so that they count towards the overall population count attributable to the all-payer model.
That would be the result, and you may wanna invite Mr. Garland in.
I think we.
But the motivation, because we checked on this, and my impression of the motivation is not to help them meet their target. It's because they believe that OneCare is actually ready to make a positive difference in this arena. And they think that it is so this 325 is like a piece of a percent of what we will spend on claims. So it's a small, relative to us, right, amount of money that they believe is going to help change how we provide healthcare and take a first step away from fee-for-service, which is just you pay because the more you do, the more you pay.
Let me offer an alternative perspective somewhat to that. Is that I'm not in a position to question Andrew Garland's motivations. He may very well believe that OneCare is the way of the future. However, given how the process unfolded and when we were told of the decision and its proximity to OneCare's 2020 budget, we effectively knew of the decision. If not effectively, we learned, I think categorically, of the decision on August 27th. And the OneCare budget was submitted with our lives included on October 1st. Which leads me to think that there's an enormous amount of pressure for OneCare to succeed. As Kevin Mullen recently said, the chair of the Green Mountain Care Board, there is no plan B. That the state is concerned, and I can understand this, that they're not meeting their all-payer targets. And that Blue Cross decided that it would play a major role in advancing that goal by folding its self-insured population. And that, not just us, that would be the state employees and any other large self-funded entity.
But we're the
Right.
largest.
And we're the largest in the group, folding us all into this particular model. So I think there are what I'll call political or structural considerations that go beyond people's belief in the efficacy of OneCare or the promise of OneCare. And I say that again largely because of how I believe the process played out, how we learned of it. And also, frankly, the jury is still very much out on whether OneCare can accomplish what it says it can accomplish. And if you look at the record for Medicare and Medicaid, it's over budgeted for Medicaid in every year except 2014 and 2017. Only 1 year did it show savings for Medicare since 2014. It's yet to show savings for the commercial population, which is much smaller than Medicaid and Medicare, in fairness to OneCare. So this is a process very much still evolving. 2018 is the first year where there are quality metrics. So we've talked a lot about finances here, but I think Laura alluded to there's also quality measures, and that's another whole conversation. And the relationship between the quality measures and the finances is also a little difficult to follow. But 2018 is the first year where the quality measures are actually coming into play for purposes of measurement and assessing the value and the promise of OneCare. And I was just at the Green Mountain Care Board yesterday listening to another presentation on this. And I think it's fair to say that Blue Cross does have a lot of optimism at the moment. And DEVA still, the Department of Vermont Health Access still is part of this as well. But there's no firm conclusion yet, there can't be, that this is a model that is working or is going to work definitively in the future.
You all know I retired a few years ago, but until then, the only insurer I ever had was Blue Cross Blue Shield. They did fine by me. So my next comment is not about them. It is this, though. Everything I've read in the media, in the news, doesn't make me feel secure about this decision. I made this point on the phone with you guys. We, VEHI, are fresh off the experience that our subscribers all had with third-party administrators. And I just, more than anything, I want our decision, whatever decision it is, to be the result of careful and ultimately plainly defensible reasoning. And that's why I thought, among others, that we ought to have a large discussion about this. How much time do we really have? It's been, you know, the range is between, the decision was already made to up to about 6 months, I think I read in one of your
So I'll
things.
let maybe Bobby Joe chime in on.
Oh, good.
On timing,
Yeah,
from when it started?
no, from what's happening in the future.
Oh, so, I mean, from my view, this is in motion, so unless the board specifically requests that it's stopped, you know, it's moving forward. I did verify with Allison today, because I was curious about what was the end date, because it seemed a little gray in our last conversation. And January 31st is the last day we can pull the plug. That would give them enough time to stop the trading. And because it's going to require a lot of work on their end to change what they're doing for their entire book of business for us. So,
That's, oh, go ahead, Laura, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, and the changes has to do with how they pay, and also has to do with sending over files around subscribers and starting to share their data, of which
Correct.
subscribers can opt out of, but that's the process that Blue Cross will entail.
So I didn't miss it, I think I heard it. We have to act tonight to say, don't proceed.
no.
I'm
A
sorry,
decision
I
needs to be
missed-
made by January 31st.
I heard that part, but
Yes.
okay.
What I'm saying is that this is in motion for their book of
But
business.
they're not pulling the string, they're not
Um,
switching it on until January 31st.
Well, it's on, you know, I think
That's
it's.
what I thought I heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are moving forward, they have to change their systems, there's, you know, things that they're building reporting and such. In order to pull us out of that reporting, January 31st is the latest, because they have to start sending that information in February of their attributable lives and,
It just feels,
Can I
it
just add one
feels
thing to
bad.
this? It's I don't disagree with what Allison told you at all. But when Laura and I spoke with Andrew, I can't remember if you're on that
Yes,
call.
Bobby Joe.
Okay.
that's why I verified.
No, that's fine. Andrew also said, because Laura suggested, and I think correctly, that this board may need more time than a month or 6 weeks to make a decision. And he also offered that if that was the case, Blue Cross could begin the attribution process, the administrative end of it. And we could continue with the deliberation around this. And if it comes beyond January 31st, and we decide ultimately to go forward with it, they would already have had the administrative machinery
That
moving.
makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So we could go beyond January 31st, but that would mean, in this scenario 2, that we have given them the green light to begin the attribution
So,
process.
all right, so I'm
Okay,
not-
so let me see if I understood what you said.
Mhm.
We could, so first of all, you will have to, as a board, take action by January 31st for them to pull us from the queue. But then, if that takes place, you could reinstitute us into the queue in February, perhaps, and still get into one payer model. That is what I understand.
Or, I think we're on the same page, maybe it's just we've got the wrong conjunction or something. What I thought he was saying is that we could tell them in January, we're not ready to make a decision, and won't be by the end of January.
One way or the other.
Right, but we could authorize them to begin the attribution process, so that in the event we make a decision in April or May, let's say, I'm just picking those dates out of my head, they would already be prepared to turn the switch on if they got a yes.
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of things that we've talked about is it's just like the doctors. You're either in for the year or you're not. I don't know that you can just come in after 6 months. I mean,
No, if the attribution process is underway, that's the key, is that they can't, what I heard Andrew saying to us is, if you tell me in April you're in, that may be too late for us to begin the attribution process for 2020. But if we begin the attribution process in January, let's say, and then you tell us in April, we'll be ready to flip the switch at that point.
So can I ask a really basic question?
Yeah.
So beginning the attribution process means,
Means what? Don't know.
means I go to my normal primary care doctor who has voluntarily joined OneCare and said, I'm in for
Or your
this."
hospital has
Or my
voluntarily joined
hospital,
that.
so I go to a
On their
place
care.
where my healthcare provider said, I'm down with this payment structure, and I go there. And if that happens,
You're gonna do that no matter what,
Right,
right?
no
Okay,
change
so
for
there's
you.
no
and
change
so.
for the
No change for the
so
patient.
attribution
Okay.
is, I count in
For
the,
purposes of OneCare
for the
bucket.
purposes of OneCare bucket. So then the question is, what are the decision-making points for whether or not I get billed, or if I
For
get.
you, there's no,
I know,
billing
but
issue.
somebody behind the scenes decides whether or not
Your provider is billed
care-
differently.
your doctor is going to receive some kind of
My-
risk assessment.
Right, whether my doctor does risk assessment for my care or just gets in
Right.
addition to fees for service, or just gets fee for service.
And who,
And is the question, who decides and when
thank you, who decides the
that,
care, right?
that
Mm-hmm.
375 up and down thing, whether that gets added to me or
Yes.
not? That's the question we're talking about.
Yes.
Correct.
Because we are going
That
into
is correct.
one care and we are gonna be attributed whether we want to or
Well,
not.
let me put it
No,
this
you're
way.
not, you're not actually going in, your doctor's in.
Yeah, our doctor.
That's it,
Yeah.
no, it's a
No,
tough
that's
distinction.
no, that's a good clarification, I will do
I
better.
gotta give John the floor, because he had
No,
a
no,
line
that's
before.
important, because it, you know,
I wouldn't
doctor
recognize him
decided.
other than he's been waiting a while.
It's been very hard not to just blurt out, right?
I'm
So,
so
sorry.
no, I wanna be clear, I understand, and I assume then we understand. The decision that, we're talking about a decision, I keep hearing the word decision. It sounds to me like Blue Cross has already made a decision.
Correct.
A decision we would make would be to say, reverse your decision, and that decision is to put our 19,000 people into the,
Risk component.
but there's a different word about the 75 to 575.
Risk corridor.
Risk
Or
corridor.
corridor. So we either, if we do nothing, our 19,000 people are in the risk corridor.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
we could then, after we do nothing past January 31st, potentially say, we should have done something before January 31st, or we want to now reverse it. And that's going to be a major, excuse my language, pain in the ass to Blue Cross, but maybe they would do that then.
No.
And I want to just leave that for a minute. But if we say to them, we are making a decision, the decision we would make would be to say to them, take our people out of the corridor. You told us you're putting them in, you're giving us till July 31st as a drop, or January 31st as a drop dead date to say, take them out. I assume if we tell them on January 31st, they can do it, but
Yes.
given all the little things that I've even seen with Blue Cross through the time, I don't know that I wanna back them up against the wall. And, you know, but essentially, I'm just trying to clarify, our decision is, do we let our people go into the corridor or do we not? And certainly short term, it doesn't change anything we pay, it doesn't change anything our employees pay, it doesn't change anything, it doesn't change the service that they get in the short term, but the theory behind all this is it's gonna make better healthcare decisions or better operational decisions by providers to somehow save money.
That's the
Moving
concept,
forward.
yes.
Couple
And I
things,
would just,
couple things, my hand was up.
okay.
In my mind's eye. There are a couple of effect issues that I think we need, and there are no answers to that, I don't think, but what is the effect, if any, of my being in the corridor on my doctors and my decision-making about the nature of the care I get?
So I would suggest that probably that any question like that,
Right.
and any other question you'll probably generate,
Right,
is above our pay grade.
right, okay.
Because this is not a system we
I
designed.
thought so.
And I would suggest, honestly, that you set up a meeting with Andrew Garland, probably by phone, right? Because it's holidays and it's hard, as soon as you can get it arranged. to talk about just, and maybe submit some questions to him ahead of time if you have them burning, so that he can, because it's really Blue Cross's decision, and they should be able to articulate it for you.
Okay.
The other thing that I wanted to say is, we do have a performance agreement with Blue Cross, and we have to hold them accountable for things. And that from the beginning, Mark and Bobby Joe and I have talked conceptually about however this plays out on whatever time frame, we need to hold Blue Cross accountable for it and think about how to do that.
Good, thank you. Peg, just hold on. The second effect issue is broader. If I understand this, and part of it, it's not just about cost. It's about improving access to high-quality primary care.
Yes.
And bending the cost trend, yes.
No, but I'm focusing on access to primary care for the moment.
That's more
Doesn't-
Medicaid.
Doesn't somebody
Focus.
have to?
No, Laura,
I don't think
it's
so.
system-wide, it's not just Medicaid.
Doesn't, one has to agree with the concept underlying one care to reach the conclusion that it's the best path to improving primary care. I'm saying this because all I've read is from people who are suggesting that one care is not living up to the promise associated with primary care. I don't want, personally, or I don't want VEHI to be, and we're not doing this, but I don't want us to jump into an environment that talks a good talk about improving access to primary care, but has the result of somehow not. And what I've read indicates that over the last several years, we have actually lost ground in terms of access to primary care in the state.
There's certainly been a lot of press in the Digger, at least, on this issue. Having been the three of us having one interview that was not representative in the
Really
article
well.
of what we said, I put that in context.
Yeah.
You may want to speak to One Care and have the CEO of One Care
I think we ought to
speak
speak
to you.
to people on the other side of this equation as
And-
well.
And you may do that, but remember, you at this point are not being asked to endorse the state's policy decision. You're not actually being asked to endorse Blue Cross's network decision. Blue Cross is made a decision on behalf of their network. They're happy to explain it. They understand that they bungled the process, and it was quite fast in how it happened, and Andrew can speak to that. But the issue before you is whether you want to say to Blue Cross, we don't want you to proceed. And Blue Cross has indicated if you make that decision in a timely manner, that they will honor it.
Okay, so we have a limited time frame, much more so than, well, more so than I thought.
Will we learn tonight, or is it for a future meeting? What are the implications of a decision you don't want to proceed? What does that mean, and what are the implications?
I mean, it means there won't be a risk-sharing
Yeah,
corridor.
what it means is that Blue Cross's contracts, as they're currently structured with providers, are gonna continue to stand. That's what Andrew Garland told us in the last conversation. And they said they will work with us to continue to provide reimbursement to doctors through fee-for-service.
I imagine the 325 will stay without
will.
having an
Right.
ability to go
Right,
up
so
or down.
Us deciding not to enter One Care is not gonna be the end of One Care or the end of us, and it's not gonna interfere with our members' access to care, and it's not gonna deprive doctors of a reasonable living wage. So I don't think we need to be worried about not joining One Care in 2020 if you choose to take that action. I'll stop for now because Peg had a question.
Oh, I apologize, Peg.
I have a ton. But I'll just start with a couple that I'm not nearly as concerned about Blue Cross and Blue Shield as I think some people in the room are, and I applaud you for being concerned about that. But we're the customer. I think their process was definitely skewed in how they handled things. it is fresh in my mind how the third-party administrators worked, and I think before we put this out to the members and the subscribers, I think we really have to be able to articulate this. I'm concerned about down the road. When we went through the big transition a couple of years ago, there was this hope and this plan, you know, we're gonna have all these out-of-pocket costs, but it was gonna shift and things were gonna be better. We haven't found that. Blue Cross Blue Shield told us that we would, it didn't happen. So now they're telling us this is the right move, and as a matter of fact, they're not telling us, they've already done it. So I think that we do have an obligation to really look at this and say, what was their motivation? You don't wanna question that, Mark, but I wanna know what's the benefit, why did they rush through this? I'd like to have some of those things answered so that we can then talk to boards and to our subscribers. That's basic, I'm
Is
sorry,
that,
I'm trying to
is
keep it
that the
short.
time, or is that,
We're good.
that's good. It's 45 minutes in. Obviously, we didn't get terribly far, but we do have a lot of work. What we learned is that we have a lot of work to do in a short period of time, I think. Actually, one last quick question. Is it an annual decision?
Yes.
Okay.
But I would just add in saying that if we sign a contract for 2020, or excuse me, if we go into this corridor world for 2020, once you're in, you're not getting out. If one care implodes, or the state decides to restructure, that's another thing. But I think the train's left the station. Kevin Mullen's right, there is no plan B. Every egg's in this basket. Once we're in, we're gonna be in.
Although that's not what Andrew said.
Well, no, Andrew says we can
That's
leave, but,
perspective, and I
well,
think that that's-
I would say from a political, I'm talking politically. Politically, I think it's gonna be very hard for anybody to back out of one care as large as we are once we enter, which is why the decision to enter has to be done really carefully.
Finally, we have a really 30-page contract, something like that, with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Oh, it's probably longer than that.
That's,
Yeah.
I stopped after 30. And the question is, are we in a position to, are there provisions in the contract that we ought to be looking at to seek some amendment to? Because, to be blunt, we're in a marginal position of strength here, given the manner in which they make this decision. How difficult is it to develop proposals for changing provisions in that contract?
I think we'd want to go back to the lawyers.
Of course we would.
We took a year and a half to negotiate that contract with Blue Cross for the ASO with the firm Jackson Lewis, and I would go back to them and ask for their recommendations. One of the problems with a contract is sometimes things are listed in more than one provision.
Yeah, I
You want to
saw
make sure that you've
Right, you gotta cover around.
circled around.
I share Laura's comment about getting good legal advice when we look at the contract again, but the process alone, the decision-making alone that led to this, has suggested to me that there are places in the contract where we can certainly suggest what we want to see, and then we'll work with the right attorneys to make sure the language is what we needed.
Right,
to be.
and if I understand what Laura said, she also thinks the law firm that negotiated this might have some suggestions.
I
for
agree,
change as
I
well.
am more than happy to take legal advice. I would also say that, on the performance agreement, we are entering a world we've never been in before. Accountable care organizations are complex. Having spent countless hours now reading through as many documents as I can about it, and sitting through some Green Mountain Care Board hearings, you can get lost in this rabbit hole so quickly, because it is so dense, it's complex, it's acronym written, it's algorithm written, and the folks who are driving this train don't necessarily stop to explain where you are at any given point in time, because they're well ahead of you. So I think in addition to talking about the contract and talking about the performance agreement, it would be wise for us to consider bringing on for a limited period of time some outside assistance from individuals or an entity that has extensive ACO experience, that understands how to assess an ACO, and to think about what your performance agreement should say and how it should be structured, so that you are getting the very best from it in relationship to the ACO and its objectives. Because I think as smart as we are on the management team, and we are smart and we're hardworking, and as smart as all of us are collectively, we are in a whole new field. And it would be wise, I think, to consider getting some outside advice. And we do have some money in the budget to do that. Also, I would add too, because we actually did some really interesting cost and quality work with Altarn and Prometheus Analytics. And If we choose to go in the direction of One Care, how do we integrate all that good work with what they're doing? And again, outside assistance might help us to think about how best to accomplish that. I don't want to be exclusively dependent on Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont for advice on how to navigate this new world.
Bobby Joe or others, or you, either of you, I don't have a particular leaning here, so I'll say what I'm thinking. If we don't go this year, what Mark's just suggested, what we've just been talking about, is gonna take a huge amount of time to enable us to reach a collective understanding of the direction we wanna go. What are the implications of our saying, wait a year?
Well, the impression that I got from Andrew the other day that he noted was, you know, there will be complexities. They will tell us, we can pull you out, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. Anytime you take 40,000, 35,000 members out of a giant group of, I mean, it causes complexities, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was an administrative cost to that. So that's, you know, just one thing that we have to think about.
So that's actually what I've been thinking this whole time, you know, just being on the, sort of in the ground of this, you know, dealing with some of the changes that we've talked about, you know, third-party administrators that blew up and all this, and being on the end of those phone calls.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have to be careful here, because I could see when, so two things, one is the cost. I would assume that when we pull ourselves out of Blue Cross's systems and say, do something unique for us, and process all of our claims. I mean, if you think about this, the number of claims that they're processing all the time, just the administrative burden of that, and take it outside of your system and put it over here and handle us differently. Well, that costs them more money to do. They're gonna pass that on to us. It's probably gonna cost us more money to pay them to administrate these things differently.
Doing that?
That's what it's
And-
right now.
And
Right.
they're trying to bring us into
Right.
a better process, though.
Right.
And I think that's part of what,
Well, they're
you
bringing
know.
us into a different process, whether it's better or not, that's open to
But they're
discussion.
attempting to, what they believe to be a better process, and this goes right up, I mean, this isn't just Blue Cross, we're talking state, we're talking federal, we're talking
Yeah.
Obama,
Just
we're
one-
talking about a lot of people here trying to make something, so it's just, all I'm saying is that the reality is that you talk up here, but if they have to do things that are different,
Yeah, the reality
And-
also
and-
is that
and-
we're not the only group having this discussion.
no, but just, I'm just throwing it out, you'd ask what the repercussions
No, I
are.
appreciate
That, to me, is one of the repercussions. And the other thing I wanted to, that I've been thinking about as we're going, and, you know, talking about the timing of making the decisions, the longer we push them up against a deadline. I mean, I saw it with new billing systems, I mean, there's a lot of things that happened here with Blue Cross in the last 2 years that I really was very integral in, that maybe not even everybody else saw, you know, like new billing systems, new account numbers, new this. These are huge undertakings, and they will try to do their best to get it done as soon as possible, but when it comes to implementing new computer systems, you need time to test them. So I would hate for VEHI to have to go through on the flip side of this,
Yeah.
that all of a sudden providers aren't getting paid
Okay,
in a
but
timely manner because they're trying to take us out of a system and put us over
But
here.
Isn't the counter
So-
to that telling them to stop and come back in a year?
Well, that's a possibility. I'm just saying, let's not push them,
Yeah,
whatever
I
the
understand.
decision is, let's not try and push them
You shouldn't
too
wait till
close
January
to.
31st.
Well, don't go past it, because I heard some, well, we could probably go a little further, we could probably go a little further. I don't think so. I think when you have your account manager telling you your drop dead date to get work done on a clerical level here is January 31st, you need to listen to that, because they probably can't get it done if you tell them later.
Okay.
And then you're gonna have providers who aren't getting paid, and then it's the whole
I-
problem
no,
again.
no, I'm
You know?
sorry. Providers are gonna get paid, right? Andrew Garland told us very clearly, our decision not to go in would not change the contractual arrangement they have with providers.
Right.
They can continue to do in 2020 what they do today. In fact, they had promised us a conversation on June 20. That was when we were gonna begin a conversation in the fall of One Care. So there was no expectation on January 1 that we were going in. That conversation could easily, in fact, I anticipated it would spill over into 2020. There's no way we're gonna start it in September, October, be wrapped up by the end of December. It was the beginning of a conversation. So the contractual world that exists today can continue to exist in 2020 for us. Doctors will get paid. So if the board chooses to defer for 2020, again, it is not gonna, I can't see any reason why doctors are not gonna get paid.
I think it's a question for Andrew. I mean, I think Andrew can answer that the
Okay.
best,
All right.
you know.
I mean,
as
in
far
my
as-
mind, it's just, it's
Okay.
just good communication in a
Oh, I
timely
don't mind good
fashion.
communication.
In a timely
John's
fashion.
at the bottom.
I wanna go back to my question before, cause now since then I got confused again, but it seems to me we're also having two different conversations. I'm hearing things about concerns about a process and how it played out. Then I'm hearing, I will call it concerns about whether a change to a new system they think is the way they wanna go, put in place, if we should be doing that or not. And I get, especially after, again, running an organization that went through the TPA piece, that change is hard and it puts fear in people. We dealt with it at a pretty large level, let me tell you. But it seems there's like a process versus substance kind of question on the table here, and I'm still confused because I thought any decision we would make is, are we going into the corridor or not? Not, are we in one payer or not? Am I missing something?
Well, if you go into the corridor, you are counted in the all-payer model. But the decision
Well-
you're making is whether to
Go into the
Stop.
corridor.
go for Blue Cross from putting us into the corridor.
But we're still with one care, those 19,000 people regardless, right?
Yes.
We're not pulling out of one care.
No,
Right.
We're in one care for 325 or in one
Correct.
care in the corridor.
correct.
It almost sounded like we were talking about, we're not going in, we're pulling out of one care.
Well, we,
You're not actually in one care. And your way of framing it is very logical, because that's how I used to frame it. And actually, Andrew Garland actually said, well, you don't actually join one care, you're not in. What he means is you're doctors who are in one care, you continue to see them, and by virtue of seeing them, you're attributed to one care. It's not actual,
and they
it's not
get
actual
325.
No,
Regardless
if
of
you go
what,
the all-payer model.
No,
you
they're
do.
getting 325 now,
No, okay, right, but in terms of the all-payer model, that's the risk for it.
but it makes a difference because those people, those doctors in one care right now who see our subscribers are getting their 325 every month for seeing them.
And that's not gonna
That's
change,
not gonna change.
regardless of what happens.
So we are in
so I
one
read
care
that as
now.
we're in one care.
Right.
And the decision
We're
is,
not in the
do we-
all-payer model without risk. The
Yes.
risk is the 325.
You're not in-
already
right.
deduction.
So, I'm sorry, John, forgive me.
Go ahead.
I'm as confused as you
Yeah.
are. I don't think the explanations are clear. We just don't get it
Well,
because we don't live in this.
it's a big
world.
topic.
The people, what I've heard us opine about is, time frame notwithstanding for the moment, that we ought to be talking with Andrew Garland from Blue Cross Blue Shield. We should likely talk with somebody from One Care, I don't know who that is. And we should likely talk to someone who has some expertise in health policy, who can provide a more, to be blunt, objective, not, I don't mean you guys, I mean, One Care and Blue Cross Blue Shield will have a perspective on this. Someone from the larger community with a health policy analysis background who's been looking at One Care since its inception. I guess I defer on you guys the obligation, I guess, to find people, but.
We know we've got to wait till January 30th. But believe me, folks, Blue Cross will make this change if we tell them to. This is not like the TPA, but I understand the analogy.
Well, the thing to understand is that a lot of us are still
No,
sort of
I,
smarting from that.
no, I absolutely understand, but believe me.
That's the.
But,
This is no direct impact to members. The only
Exactly.
impact to members of your provider being in One Care is that you have access to a bigger network of community services. I mean, that's what it's like being in One Care, is it's not just about your PCP, it's finding a nutritionist that can work with you, or being part of a community health network. It's not like, so the TPA thing, I get that, believe me, I get that. I reconciled 250 accounts this summer, I get it. But it's blind to the member. The member's not going to know, whether it's you, whether it's one of your students that it's in Medicare, or Medicaid, everybody's would be getting these same services as being part of this. It's really like a big community network.
But could it impact premiums down the road? Could we be next year saying, you know what, our premiums are going up because we went into One Care, it didn't play out the way Blue Cross Blue Shield thought it would, and so now we've got a 15% increase in premium?
What was the difference?
I'm more concerned they'll go up because we didn't go.
That's
what I.
Yeah.
Could go
So
either way, but I
the-
don't know, and so that's why I want some
The maximum amount it could
information.
go up is about $500,000
Okay.
of a $240 million program.
That's the 575
The
corridor.
premium could go up,
No,
No.
the impact to us,
yeah.
if we have to pay $575, it could be up to $500,000. But keep in mind that we only do that if we achieved double that in savings.
Right, we can take a snapshot along the lines of what Laura and Bobby George saying,
So
right, in
we
2020.
gain.
That's right.
What we don't know
That's right.
is how OneCare plays out in the future, we can't know that. So for example, OneCare is already asking the legislature for more Medicaid money. And Medicaid, and the legislature, at least initially, what we're hearing is not receptive to that. So if OneCare doesn't get the Medicaid funding